Yeah, we're BRB Technologies. We're an independent R&D firm. We operate in the active safety sector with a focus on the tire road contact patch. That's the very foundation of vehicle dynamics. Our purpose here is to ignite a discussion about what seems to be an overlooked strategy for dealing with understeer, oversteer, control, slippery roads, all that in general. And we're here to ask the question, have state-of-the-art safety systems, ABS, stability control, tires, all that, has that brought us to the very limits of what's possible according to the laws of physics when we're dealing with low friction events? We're going to create an imaginary car. We're going to crawl under the tires and get a good look at understeer. More specifically, we're going to study friction forces during a dangerous emergency avoidance event while braking and cornering on a modestly slippery road. Now, slippery roads are not just an ice and snow problem here in the north. Rain, especially the first rain after a dry spell, can be extremely hazardous, especially because people don't slow down in the rain. So slippery roads are certainly a vexing problem everywhere. We're going to keep this simple. We're going to paint a picture in broad brushstrokes. We're going to ignore some important details such as speed, weight transfer, and all that, all to focus on one problem. Everything will be kept simple in just imperial units, pounds. Okay, imaginary car. It weighs 2,000 pounds. The weight is evenly distributed, 500 pounds on each wheel. The weights are going to stay the same through this whole exercise. We'll park the car on a dry, level road, good sound pavement, that kind of thing, and we're going to lock up the brakes. Now we attach a huge fish scale to the front bumper and pull. The locked wheels start to skid forward when the scale reads 1,600 pounds. Now that 1,600 pounds is the static friction force for this given condition. That's this car, this weight, these tires, all that. We now have two numbers, 2,000 pounds and 1,600 pounds. If we divide the 1,600 by the 2,000, we get another number of 0.8. It has no units, no pounds or anything. That's the coefficient of friction. That's mu. That describes the slipperiness between these two surfaces, tire and road. If we change the weight, that 0.8 would still come out the same. It's just it doesn't matter what the weight is. Well, it does a little bit, but not much. Now this would be the high limit of braking force and represents the friction available for 95% of our driving experience. This is what we kind of base our habits on, our intuition for what's a safe speed, what's a safe following distance, what do we have to allow for a stopping distance. The friction forces between your tire and road are very important numbers. Your life may very well depend on these numbers, yet you very likely never know what they are. Your speed reads out on the dash, you know that in real time, but you don't know the friction force. So the driver doesn't know what the safe speed is or the safe following distance, all of that stuff. Now the higher the number for friction force, the safer the condition. Friction forces vary tremendously, and they can change in a heartbeat. They can change just by changing road conditions or even the driver's steering and input. Think about crossing onto an icy bridge deck or black ice or first shower after it's been dry for a while. Nature has this way of setting up these booby traps for us. One thing more here, a rolling tire has the same friction force as a stationary tire. That is, the slipperiness is the same for both stationary and a rolling tire. However, that is not the case if the tire is sliding. That fish scale will read a much lower number when it just has to keep the wheels skidding along instead of initiating the skid. So that's the second number of friction force, and it's called a sliding or dynamic friction. Of course, being a lower number, it's more dangerous. Now the next slide is winter testing. And we've got two trucks, 30 miles an hour, side by side. They hit the brakes at the same spot. Uh, that's me on the right, everybody else on the left. Thank you. Now let's look at a friction circle. The vertical scale here, or longitudinal friction force, shows acceleration on the bottom half of the circle and braking on the top half. The circle has a radius of 1,600 pounds. That represents our 2,000 pound car on the 0.8 coefficient of friction road surface, a good road. That's generally what we expect for braking and or turning. We're going to ignore the bottom half of this circle, the whole acceleration thing, because that's for the race car drivers. And we're not running a race here. We're just trying to get home for dinner. Now we'll move our imaginary car to a moderately slippery road with a coefficient of friction of 0.3. Notice how that circle got a lot smaller. The scale on the front bumper, remember that fish scale, it's a 2,000 pound car, the brakes are locked up, and that scale will now read 600 pounds when it starts to skid. If we're driving the same car on the same road and stomped on the brakes, the ABS would be chattering and keeping us in static friction. Without turning the steering wheel, we could expect 600 pounds of friction force to help us stop. That would be 300 pounds from the front wheels and 300 pounds from the back. Now, we're interested in the front wheels. And what we're going to find here is that the front wheels are very different than the rear wheels. The front wheels do all the cornering. The rear wheels aren't involved at all. So to get a look at this, we're going to cut the car in half right at the center of gravity. So we have the front wheels independent, separated from the rear wheels. Now the horizontal line is for lateral or cornering friction force. You have 300 pounds for the right, 300 pounds for the left, or 300 pounds for braking. Note that just inside that circle is the sweet spot, the maximum friction force for braking or turning without crossing into skidding. You cannot escape that circle because that's the point you cross into the skid. You're in dynamic friction now, so a smaller number, a smaller circle is much more dangerous. No matter how hard you stand on the brakes, the ABS has your back when you're getting close to that circle. They keep you just right in that sweet spot, right inside the edge of that circle, getting all the available friction. But in cornering, there's nothing equivalent. Nobody wants to let go of that steering wheel. If you steer just a bit too hard, you hit that line and cross into dynamic friction, a much smaller number. Now the radius of the circle, the friction force, defines the available options for cornering and braking for just the front wheels. You can spend those options on one, the other, or some of both, while the rear wheels, ABS chattering away and harvesting all the available friction force possible, in this case 300 pounds. So now, if you have no braking, your foot's off the brake, you're just cornering, you're just turning, two front wheels, you've got 300 pounds of cornering force, not 600, because it's just the front wheels involved. Remember, you had 600 pounds for braking, but you've got 300 pounds for cornering. This assumes somehow you just turned just right, so you're just on the inside of that circle. You didn't turn too far, too fast, you get in trouble on the wrong side of this very demanding circle. Now let's see what happens when you stomp on the brakes the same time that you're in this turn. Now you're sharing that circle, that friction force, with the braking. And as you can see, you see the 45-degree line going up. That's the best you can do. So say you've got 180 pounds for braking and 180 pounds for cornering. So your circle keeps getting smaller as things progress here. So you went from 600 pounds just braking, this is to 300 pounds just turning, to now 180 pounds when you're braking and turning. Now, while we're cornering, we'll also apply the brakes. So the friction force for the total circle is being shared by both braking and cornering. So we'll say each gets half. There's a little bit of an advantage as you'll see. So 60% of the 300 pounds, you can get 180 pounds of total cornering friction force if we can keep it from dropping into sliding or dynamic friction. But the driver panics and he turns the wheel too far and too fast. So now he's tried to cross that line, that circle. He's in sliding friction now. It easily cuts the circle in half. So now that 180 pounds is cut in half to 90 pounds of available friction. Also, because the lateral friction is using up some of that circle, and because the front wheels are skidding, the total braking force has lost about 120 pounds. That now drops from 600 pounds to 480. That's 300 pounds from the rear, we always have that, and 180 from the front wheels. So we started this event with 600 pounds of available friction for straight line braking, but the driver panicked and turned the steering wheel too far, so now you just have 90 pounds of cornering friction force. That means you're trying to influence the direction of this traveling car that weighs 2,000 pounds with just 90 pounds of friction force for cornering. That's understeer. Now we've been looking at a road with a 0.3 coefficient of friction. And that's only modestly slippery. That's like a slushy road. If we were on really slippery ice, the radius of that circle would be more like 15 or 20 pounds. So to recapitulate, when the road gets a bit slippery, there's a cascade of dangerous effects that are rarely seen in dry conditions and are nearly impossible to anticipate, much less understand for the average driver. Braking has some big advantages. There's no driver fault for braking too hard. All four wheels are involved in braking, and the ABS assists braking, so there's no lockup. You stay right inside you stay on the sweet spot on that circle. And the rear wheels don't have to share the friction circle with the cornering. The cornering has some big handicaps. The driver is likely to panic, turn too far. Front wheels only, so only half the friction force is braking. You have no analogous ABS to maintain static friction, so you easily go into dynamic friction. And cornering must share the friction circle with the braking. So the takeaway, you've got a big problem at the tire road contact patch at the front wheels. It's not the brakes, it's not the tires, it's not the stability control, it's none of that. They're wonderful. It's at the contact patch. So if you're going to fix this, you got to go where the problem is to fix it, the contact patch. Now back to the original question. Have tires, brakes, and stability platform brought us to the very limits of what laws of physics allow? The unequivocal answer is yes and no. Yes, if we limit ourselves to two surfaces, tires and roads. But they're bumping into that glass ceiling, static friction, that's the limit. And you cannot get past that limit unless, and now the no answer. To get past the present limits, you must look where the problem is. It's at the contact patch, at the front wheels especially. Thus, the place this needs to be addressed is at those contact patches. And the only time it can be addressed is in the moment of the event. It's like an airbag that's deployed in the moment of the crash. You know, we did the studded tires thing. That doesn't work. You can't fix it before you get there. Both understeer and oversteer can be greatly mitigated by delivering a tractive medium to the front wheel's contact patches. Now you know why we focus our attention on adding pounds, a lot of pounds, of friction force at the front wheels. This begs the question, so why even talk about this if it's impossible to exceed static coefficient of friction? You have two surfaces. The glass ceiling is a static friction force. There seems to be this paradigm that we have to stay with two surfaces. That's to say, we're inside that pesky circle. Why? Physics 101. To change the friction force, we have to change something between the two surfaces. So that's what we do. And it really isn't even that hard. In the last few months, things have come together with designs and materials where, yeah, we can do that. Icy roads / wet roads, whatever it is, we can do it at any speed. So what's this proposed strategy under discussion? Discover and react very quickly to the low friction avoidance events electronically, automatically, in real time. Then quickly deliver a third element, the tractive medium, to the contact patch that adds significant pounds of friction force at the front wheels. Always when needed, yet only when needed, and at any speed. Here's another quick look at winter testing. This is about a 0.1 coefficient of friction, and we're looking at cornering and braking at the same time. That's me on the right, by the way. So that brings us to the big question. Is it possible? Yes, I can answer that question. Yes, it certainly is possible. Is it feasible to exceed static coefficient of friction on a slippery road? Feasible is a lot harder question to answer. I think it is, but I'm not the guy to answer that, so that's up to you guys. We're the R&D guys. That's where we leave it. So, any questions?